All righty. Well, thank you for joining me, Dr. Jones. I'm really, really grateful. I wouldn't have thought you'd said yes, and I appreciate it a lot.
You're
Um,
welcome.
and you know what we're planning to talk to because I pretty much just printed out those exact questions I sent you.
Okay.
And do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm the editor of Culture Wars magazine, author of a number of books. My latest book is Walking with a Bible and a Gun, The Rise, Fall, and Return of American Identity. And it's available at fidelitypress.org.
Wonderful. Well, like I said, I'm really grateful that you agreed to talk to me, and I've been real nervous about it all day, and I was hoping to have time to kind of like get into the mood for it, but I was just buried in children and work and stuff like that, so I'm just jumping
Well,
into it
jump
like
into
you.
it. Jump into the mood. We're in
Okay.
the mood. We're in the mood right now.
So you told us that your latest book was Walking with a Bible and a Gun, which is about American history. Do you want to just tell us more about that and also just kind of your goals in general and what things look like for you and what you're trying to accomplish? If you have more to say about it.
Yeah, every book is based on the last book, and I suddenly realized that we have an identity crisis right now. We're in order to contextualize this, I'm saying that we are at the end of the Third Republic right now. The First Republic began in 1781. Everything
Okay.
lasts 80 years. Nothing lasts more than 80 years, which is the lifespan of a man. So 80 years from 1781 was 1861. The First Republic ended with the Civil War. Certain ideas and concepts did not pass from the First to the Second Republic. One of them was the fact that each state was a kind of independent state in a kind of alliance with other states. After the Civil War, each state was a department of the United States of America, and they lost their sovereignty. Slavery disappeared at this point, bloody battle. And the next republic, the Second Republic, began in 1865 with the end of the Civil War. And that ended in 1945 with the end of World War II. At that point, the ethnic neighborhood disappeared. After World War II, the ethnic neighborhood was basically declared illegal as part of the social engineering that flowed naturally from war and was extended after World War II to destroy local identity and ethnic identity. So
That's
at this point, the people who were Polish who lived in Chicago were driven out of their neighborhoods by black proxy warriors. Same thing in Philadelphia. And when they went to the suburbs, they became white, which is the status that the government wanted to promote after Brown versus School Board, black versus white rather than real ethnicities. So after 1945, as I said, we have the era of social engineering. And that's the Third Republic, and that's coming to an end now. It's now 80 years after that, 2025, 80 years after that. And there are certain things that are not going to pass into the Fourth Republic. Like Sears Roebuck. Who thought that Sears Roebuck would ever come to an end? But more importantly, I think the main victim of this transition is going to be Protestantism.
really
Emmanuel Todt wrote a book, a Frenchman, called La Défaite de l'Occident, in which he said that the American empire is failing because its hidden grammar is Protestantism, and Protestantism has evaporated. So once that evaporates, that is, in many ways, the basis of American identity. That's what Samuel Huntington said. He said, an American is an Anglo-Protestant. So now we're going to have a real serious identity crisis because the main source of identity has disappeared, which is basically Protestantism. And I think, I don't know whether you want to talk about this, but I think one of the main manifestations of this right now is Tucker Carlson, a man who calls himself an Episcopalian, but has a kind of ironic attitude toward his own denomination, his own religion. And he's struggling. He's struggling to keep up with the changes that are happening right now, because once the ethnic grammar of America is Protestant, Catholic, Jew. Three
Right.
religions. When Protestantism disappears, you're going to have Catholic and Jew. And that's the battle that's going to inaugurate the Fourth Republic. And Tucker doesn't know where to stand. He can't deal with the issue right now. As you could tell by recent pronouncements at the funeral at Charlie Kirk's memorial service, where he talked about hummus eaters. Can't bring himself to say the word Jew. And that is the most important word right now in America. Everybody knows this. He knows it, but he can't bring himself to say it.
That's really that's really interesting, because I was following you a little bit 5 years ago, and I'm 30 years old now, so any changes that are coming are pretty much coming from my generation, and the one immediately after me. And I was having an identity crisis when I first followed you, and I never really listened to you for hours and hours or anything like that, but just a few things you said about being white and not being white basically made me really think about, because I grew up in the suburbs. My mother was Swedish and atheist, and ethnically, she was American, and my dad was Irish and Catholic, and I was the only son that wasn't baptized. So, so it was kind of
why is that? Why were you the only one?
Well, it had to do with where they were living. They were living in Los Angeles when they first got together, and I'm the youngest of 5. And by the time, which is a Catholic sort of area, and so it was more cultural. And my dad's very deeply thoughtful about spiritual things. I spent a lot of time thinking about what has happened to him religiously and really like delving into it. But I think he thinks that spiritual things are more abstract, like he likes Taoism and that kind of thing. And by the time I was born, they had moved to New England. And so there just wasn't that reason to baptize, from what I can tell. Okay. And so when I was following you, I was more like Calvinistic, and I had converted to that. And then shortly after, I got married, and then I became Catholic from a pretty drastic change, and then I started having children, so I kind of fell off the public. I stopped paying attention.
Why Calvinism? Why did you become a Calvinist?
I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and not in Seattle. I grew up in Everett. So, like I said, I grew up in the suburbs, and out there, the standard is non-denominational. People just don't really talk about anything too deep theologically, but my family was very intellectual, and I love history. And in fact, one of my biggest hangups with Catholicism was the history of Catholicism in America, at least, and I figured that out. But basically, when I left my father's house, I had to make it on my own, and I realized some pretty painful realities about life. And I read the Bible straight through, and by the time I had gotten to the New Testament, because I was kind of nervous to read about Jesus, because that was hard for me at the time, I had been introduced to some preachers, particularly Alistair Begg in Cleveland, and some of the things he said jive with me. And so, but I remember I always had this internal conflict, especially with salvation by grace and that kind of thing, where it just didn't make any sense to me. And I had to battle it and kind of hold on to my faith, as they called it. And when I became Catholic, I was very terrified. When I was looking into it first, I was very terrified between being an idolater on one side or being, in schism from the true church on the other side. Because I had read the Bible, and there were so many things that I was like, what in the world is he talking about with the bread and whatnot? But anyways, not to talk too much. I'm just hoping to make you a little.
Yeah.
But you were very helpful to me. That's all I'm trying to say.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. How old's your mother?
She's in her late 60s now, I think.
60s. So, was she born in Sweden?
No. I said that just because of the context. No, her side of the family came here in like the 1600s.
Oh, okay.
And they'd been in Massachusetts forever. And
were they Lutherans, or did they become Congregationalists?
I honestly have no idea. Part of my parents got divorced, and so um, I have all these cousins and all this extended family, and we moved to the West Coast, and I've just not been in touch with them. Now, I haven't really been able to establish ties with them, and it's actually a big problem now because we have 3 children. Our oldest is 4, and she's kind of difficult. And nobody taught me how to be married. Nobody taught me how to have children. I knew I wanted to do it, but
It's always on the job training. There's no way to get around it. And I guess the only thing you can go on is your parents and what you call them up when there's some type of crisis and see what they say.
right. Well, what I found out is most of my friends now, once they have 1, 2, or 3 children, at some point they hit a point where they just stop trying to go off on their own and they go and live near their parents. And
Yeah.
that's an option I don't have.
Yeah,
because of the breakdown community.
I've been meditating on my own personal history. I was born 4 months after the Kinsey report came out.
Yeah, you were saying that.
And so
I just listened to your interview, one of your interviews.
This is the bad sign I was born under, and that's kind of abstract, but it became very personal because Kinsey, the only reason he could claim legitimacy was because he claimed to be a scientist. So he was an expert on gall wasp, which somehow made him an expert on human sexuality. I never figured that one out either. But science was the legitimator of everything at that point.
Yeah.
If you talk about the early 50s. And so the real intrusion, the real deep emotional intrusion into my life via science was John B. Watson, who wrote a book on child rearing. John B. Watson was the father of behaviorism. He was a Southern boy. Southern boy, grew up on a farm. He loved animals. He just loved being around animals because he was a farm boy, and basically assumed that human beings were just like animals on the farm, and they're not. They're completely different operating system. And so he basically understood that if you feed the chickens at a certain time of day, they're all going to come back at that time of day. They have memory, and you can program their habits. You can work with their instincts and program them. And he thought you could do that. He thought you could do that with human beings. Mike, can you turn this down a little bit?
Yeah.
He thought you could do that with human beings, and you can't. But what he did, he reinvented himself as a expert on child rearing, with completely bizarre practices. Like he thought that women should not have contact with their children. It would turn children into weaklings or something like that. So the women kept complaining and saying, well, I really want to check in on. So he said, well, if you're really interested in whether your sleeping baby is okay, buy a periscope and look over the edge of the crib with your periscope so your child can't see you.
Wow.
Well, this is how anybody could get away with it is beyond me. But the real serious damage that he did was with breastfeeding. He said breastfeeding is not scientific because you don't know how much milk the baby's getting. Well, who cares how much? So you can't measure it in milliliters. Who cares? The baby eats until he's full, and that's it. And then he stops eating. So this so-called science intruded there. And so my mother, doctor told my mother she should bottle feed. So she took drugs that dried up her milk, which was really weird and dangerous. And then she started messing with formula, which was cost money and was really a big deal back then, where you had to boil water and all this other type of stuff. And my grandmother told her she was crazy for doing this. But this was a serious disruption of my life and the lives, I would say, of my generation, the baby boomer generation, all because of this weird understanding of science, that somehow science has authority over your parents, or that somehow that you can allow this to disrupt the bond between mother and child. by
Right.
getting rid of breastfeeding. This is the story, the kind of the untold story of my generation.
Yeah. Well, one of the problems is we're raised by your generation, and all of my generation is just confused. It's like you could figure out something's wrong, like we did breastfeeding and home birth and that kind of thing, but it doesn't eradicate all. Like my wife is just so anxious about every little thing and I've tried to get her to calm down, but it's hard when you're a man. But it's like you go to the midwife or something, and they're all into like very strange kind of like um modern, what do you want to call it, new age stuff, and they're all basically hippies. And then but they still use these arbitrary measurements from the government. They're like, well, if it's 10.0, I remember the blood sugar was a big one, but I can't remember the numbers. It's like 10.0, you're fine, everyone's calm, but 9.9, it's the end of the world. Now you gotta get a major surgery or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's just been
Well,
a heck of a time.
the baby boomer generation, or the hippies, I was one of them in the 60s.
My dad too.
They reacted against the whole social engineering thing in an inchoate way. They didn't understand exactly what was the magnitude of what was going on. No one had done the research. I did a lot of the research. My book, Slaughter of Cities, is the first book to use the word ethnic cleansing when it comes to something like urban renewal. That was scientific, and I'm saying no, it was ethnic cleansing to drive the Catholics out of the city. So there was a kind of inchoate reaction that the baby boomers knew that something was wrong, but they couldn't identify it because, in a sense, how are you supposed to identify it when you're 17 years old, when you start to realize there's something wrong? So it focused on things like the draft, the war in Vietnam, and of course that got manipulated, and it got manipulated by the Jews. And so the classic example in my life was Earth Day, 1970 in Philadelphia, and 70,000 hippies show up. I was married at this point, and I got problems. I got transportation problems. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I got serious transportation problems. I live in Philadelphia. I don't want to own a car. It's too expensive. There's public transportation. How do I get around? And I decided bicycle. And a lot of my generation bought bicycles. And the problem was they bought the Schwinn Varsity, which is a 42-pound racing bike, which is a contradiction in terms. And it was so ugly and so heavy and so uncomfortable. They rode it once and never rode it again. So it spent the next 30 years in the garage. I bought a Peugeot, which is a much better bicycle, lighter and so on and so forth. And then we got rid of the car. And this was a big break. And it was a real form of liberation for me, because I could use transportation to get in shape, rather than two separate things. I saved a lot of money, and it was so we go to Earth Day, which is when the question's on my mind, and this Jew, Ira Einhorn, shows up. Nobody knew who Ira Einhorn was. Completely unknown guy until he shows up on the stage of Earth Day at Belmont Plateau in 1970. And the high point, so I'm thinking, is this guy going to tell me what kind of bicycle am I? Am I going to get some type of practical advice here? And the high point of Earth Day was him kissing this other Jew, Allen Ginsberg, on the lips. Everybody, this was a deliberate act of transgression. Now, I don't want to vouch for the chastity of 70,000 hippies there on Belmont Plateau, but I would say that homosexuality was not part of the zeitgeist. This was 1970. This was disgusting. And everybody was supposed to be open-minded, and everybody's turned off by this guy who basically, he's there to take over the movement, to take over the anti-war movement. He's an ecologist. He's a sensitive guy. He built a reputation for himself in Philadelphia as the big ecology guru, until finally people started noticing a smell coming out of his apartment. And it turns out that that smell was his girlfriend, who he chopped up and stuck in a trunk. And she was rotting at that point. And that's the story of Ira Einhorn. So with all these black ops that my generation did not understand,
Right.
We were guinea pigs in an experiment that no one explained to us.
Right. Well, yeah, I was talking to that with some friends of mine not long ago. Is I think ultimately at this point everyone's mentally ill, and basically because we've been traumatized at such a young age, and the baby boomers seems like television and these kinds of things, like there were these very direct you couldn't interact mediums for getting them to believe in things, like my dad was talking about ecology, and he said, well, I remember seeing the Detroit River catch on fire or something like that.
No,
And I
it's
was
the Cuyahoga River in Ohio.
right, yeah, and I was like, well,
Detroit River never caught on fire.
pardon me.
Cuyahoga River in Ohio.
Yeah, so point being though is his whole reason for this belief he had was something he had seen on TV one time, and that seems like what basically shaped the baby boomer generation was this very potent technology, and like my generation's more the internet, and that
Right.
has affected us crazy. But what's interesting about it is you kind of have to sort through what you're looking through, and so I found that people my age just are naturally able to reject things more easily. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyways, that's
No,
what we
it's
were
a
talking about.
completely different medium.
I was
I was 15 years old when John F. Kennedy was murdered, and
right,
I was in school. I was in high school, getting ready to go to cross country practice. And when I went home, you turned on the TV, and Walter Cronkite said it was a lone deranged gunman, and that was it. And that was the story for what, 30 years, until people
right,
started wondering maybe that's not the real story. That's
right,
the difference. Compare that to Charlie Kirk, the murder of Charlie Kirk. And
right,
within hours, you have people saying, "Well, no, I don't think that guy shot him. What about this guy? What about that?" It's not as controllable as three TV networks was in 1963.
right. Well, and so that was so like kind of to get towards what I wanted to talk about, which is you were talking about how um it's funny you brought up bicycles, by the way. I want to say that because I happen to be reading a book by a gal, Diana Lease, out of Utah, that's writing a book. It's called Love Letters to Suburbia, but it's all about how car dependence is a big problem with society. And I noticed that, like, I can't let my children out the front door like you might have been able to when you were raising children, because everything's built where everyone's got to have 3 cars. But I just want to throw that out there for her. But so that's a real thing. But you were talking about science, and honestly, most of my friends, you're one of the few good Catholic men that has affected me well, and maybe that's just because you're at a distance. You said on your interview about Charlie Kirk that you felt abandoned by the Catholic Church, and I've converted into it, and I feel abandoned by it in many ways too. And one of the things I've noticed is that um, the academics and whatnot seem to be the ones who kind of know what's going on and that kind of thing. But the battle is all in academia and arguing about like ideas and philosophies and stuff like that. And that's very important. But my generation just needs to make money and survive and raise a family, and we can't do it. And so I wonder sometimes if it's just like the good people like yourself. I can think of a number of other people. I'm just using you as an example. Don't understand that about my generation, but I've heard you talk about it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I mean, I have 5 children,
Right.
and you're as old as you're a little bit younger than my youngest child. My oldest child is in his 50s. And so we've been through this with them, the struggles. That's the struggle you have when you're getting started. When you first get married, it was shortly after that we had our first child. And then that led to, so I did solve the transportation problem, but now we got this whole child issue thing and how are we going to raise the child? And we were determined to breastfeed and have natural childbirth in reaction to John B. Watson, even though I certainly at that time didn't know who John B. Watson was. So it was a reaction against that whole social engineering, even though I couldn't identify the problem. So
Right.
I had to create these categories because they didn't exist until I wrote the books. And one of the
Right.
biggest categories that I had to create was the Jews, because
Right.
no one
Yeah.
was allowed to use that as a category. And I'm trying to say I had to disconnect that from the racial issue, which I
Right.
did in the book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. But we struggle. People are still struggling. Tucker Carlson's struggling because that's the big problem that's facing us all, and he can't seem to say it. His upbringing will not allow him to create the proper categories he needs to deal with the problems.
Right. Well, I mean, and you did a good job talking about what the category of the Jews means, because it's not. It's like most of the, or a lot of the Jews at Jesus' time became Catholic and whatnot. You know. Do you want to just talk about that real quick?
Well, yeah, at the
What
time of
is the Jews? Because it's not all Jews. I remember you saying that.
right. Well, it goes back to I had to trace it back to the time when Jesus Christ, the Messiah, arrives on this earth, and the Jews have to decide whether to accept him or reject him. The Jews who accepted Jesus Christ they became the Catholic Church. The Jews who rejected them, who rejected him, they killed him, and he was the Logos incarnate. So this rejection of Logos was now their new identity. And when you reject Logos, which is the order of the universe, you become a revolutionary. And that's what they've been ever since. And that provides the framework to deal with the question now. So you don't have to beat a dead horse. Like when Tucker Carlson makes the mistake of talking about anti-Semitism, that's not a category of reality. That's a category of the ADL that's created to basically shut down any discussion they don't like. And so because he can't do that, because he can't understand that the Jews is a category of reality, he comes to the wrong conclusion, exactly the wrong conclusion. And so it's just a momentary bump in the road, or has Tucker Carlson hit the wall and can't go beyond it? He just bang against that wall. You know, he's just going to get up, bang against it, fall down, going to jump, bang against it. Or is he going to, I mean, he knows who I am. He knows who I am. He knows what I say. A part of my stuff is ending up in his discussions, sort of submerged in a way. Are you going to deal with it? Or are you going to pretend that you can get by simply on your clever use of categories like hummus eaters? You're just being too clever here, Tucker. You're being way too clever. It's not going to work. You have to face reality. And you're going to have to abandon your identity as the Protestant CIA guy. It's got to go. It's not going to work, because those whatever principles that exist there will not solve the problem that we're faced with. Theologically, he can't solve the problem because he doesn't know who he is, doesn't know whether he's an Episcopalian or not. He uses words like heresy, for example. What does that mean? What does that mean when you're an Episcopalian? What does that mean? So it's all completely disconnected. And that's the problem. That's the problem.
Right. Let me ask some of these questions here. Let's see. Oh, what is your hope? That's actually, somebody said that. So my wife were watching you, and she actually got kind of like, watching E. Michael Jones makes me feel hopeless and whatnot. And
tell her our hope is in the Lord. Our hope is in the Lord. And God is in charge of human history, and God can change things like that. And I'm saying the grammar of human history is 80-year cycles, and we're at the end of one and the beginning of the other, and God is in charge.
What do you think that'll look? What do you think that'll look like? Like, do you have any? I mean, people always talk about, like, you know, and I have this problem with Protestants and with Catholics, is they have this idea like it's the end of the world and the Antichrist is coming and stuff like that. And you know, I've got little children. I understand why they think that, but I don't think it's true. You know, some people talk about the triumph of the Immaculate Heart.
I don't deal with these issues. That may be the Antichrist is a real thing. Whether he's coming, I don't think he's coming. I'm trying to
Right.
deal with a reasonable understanding of the signs of the times, because we're told to, interpret the signs of the times. That's what I'm trying to do based on Catholic principles, which I think are sophisticated enough to deal with them.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what I'm trying to do.
that makes a lot of sense. So putting out any kind of overt supernatural major thing like that, what do you think the future would look like for my generation?
First of all, I am not going to put away the supernatural. My whole life is based on the supernatural. The
Right.
question
Sure.
is understanding in a sophisticated way the way God works in human history and not being dependent on signs and wonders
Right.
like,
So
like apparition.
how would you work in America then for like us raising children? What does the future look like? Best guess. I mean,
The future is expectation. You're living in the present. You need to deal with this one day at a time. You have to face whatever crisis, whatever challenge you have, one day at a time, and leave the rest to God, because you
sure.
can't work on something, you can't plan on something you do not know. And if there's one thing you do not know, it's the future. No one knows this but God. And so to constantly tie yourself up in knots because of some future contingency, which may or may not happen, is a bad idea. So focus on the present. Focus on
Right.
concrete issues every day. You get up in the morning and you got something you got to do that day. And it's in our Father, give us this day our daily bread. God works on a daily basis. He'll take care of you day by day. And it's your job to put your faith in him for the things that you cannot know over the horizon of the future.
Right. I have a lot of thoughts about that. Would you because I actually am trying very hard to do things in my present day. I feel like you haven't. Would you talk about the sin? I gave you this question, the sin of usury, and kind of get into that. Like, how would you define that? And I'm
Interest
not
on a
trying to throw
loan.
you through a loop. Go ahead.
No, I can give you a talk based on a 1,200-page book, but it would be a long talk. So I suggest that you read the book. It's called Barren Metal, A History of Capitalism as a Conflict Between Labor and Usury. Usury is a sin. Interest on loans is sinful. The economy we live in now is crippled by debt, by unrepayable debt, which what happens when you do not nip usury in the bud. So we now are facing a huge financial crisis because of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, in fact, that was the book I was supposed to read before I didn't. I haven't had time to read it, but I plan to get it. But that's what everyone was telling me is that that's where Michael Jones has talked about this problem. I think. I think that's the biggest problem affecting, people trying to
I,
raise children and whatnot.
I think you're right. There's student loan debt. Do you have student loan debt?
No, nope. I just have a mortgage. When
Okay. Well, then you're
which is
lucky
not
because
good.
but it's better than student loan debt. That's a really bad thing that's crippling your generation, preventing them from getting married,
Yeah,
forming families.
yeah. One of the things that kind of broke me with conservatives around the same time that I was converting to Catholicism was they did not want to forgive student loan debt.
Totally stupid.
Uh,
You have to forgive debt. It's in the Bible. It's called the Jubilee year because debt, floating loans are unrepayable and they strangle the economy. But the meantime, the usurer gets rich, and he gets so rich that he basically buys the political system and destroys any ability to deal rationally with debt. That's the situation we're in right now. It's both a combination of usury and gambling. This is where Jewish money comes from.
yeah, yeah. Well, and then they break our lives into little pieces. It's like the fact that my mother is in a completely different state, and then they provide something like when we were having trouble nursing one of our sons, we had to pay a gal to teach. Well, actually, no, we asked her and she did it for free. But people have to pay people to teach them how to breastfeed, for instance. And so like everything ends up being capitalized, and then we don't have the community, we don't have the nation. When I read the Jubilee year in the Bible, that was the thing, the description of that in Deuteronomy or whatever, that was the thing that convinced me God loved me, because that imagining that happening, like I'm nowhere near my relatives. My father has got no house, no land to give me. Um, just inheriting. Things are getting more expensive every day. You know, basically because of usury. Um, well, thank you for. Do you want to say anything else about that? That's the thing I care about more than anything, to be honest with you.
I can understand that, and I can understand that sometimes you feel like a motherless child because
Yeah, an orphan and a stranger.
your generation has been betrayed. My generation is betrayed too, but in a different way. It's a different period of time, but and the forces that betrayed my generation were much weaker than the forces which are in control right now. But God understands that, and that's why you have to put your trust in Him for the things you
Yeah.
can't control. It's that simple. He knows that. He knows that, and He will get you through.
Well, I think there's a lot of weakness to, because the thing about usury is it always has to do more. Like it always has to grow, and that's why everything's got to be garbage. The factory that they paid for in a loan has got to produce 10,000 pins a day, and then what do you do with the pins? Well, you throw them away. So why all the clothes are garbage.
What do you do? What do you do when you can't afford? When people can't afford to buy your product because they are loaded down with debt, and you have to grind them, or you have to come up with a product because you're loaded down with debt, and so you're going to cut the quality of the product and raise the price, which means it's a vicious circle. This is the fundamental problem of a usurious culture. That's the situation we're all facing right now, and when at a time when the government can't deal with obvious problems like the genocide in Gaza, which is obviously wrong. Everybody knows this is wrong. People don't think that loans. A lot of people don't think there's anything wrong with borrowing money, but everybody knows that the genocide in Gaza is wrong, and no one's capable of doing anything about it. So this is we're at a turning point.
Right.
We're moving from one republic to another. The old solutions are not going to work. They're not going to move into. No one knows what the new paradigm is going to be because it's in the future.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the sorts of. If like what you're talking about with ethnicity coming from, like the Catholic ethnic neighborhoods have an ethnic identity. Well, if Protestantism's removed because people are becoming more serious about things, it's like, well, then everyone starts to wonder what their identity is. And then places like Louisiana that are Cajun, they're not American, they're American imperially, but they're Cajun in their nation. And then even Texas with Mexico, and Appalachia's got a very strong identity. People talk about balkanization, but it seems like even right now, there's so much weakness because you have these giant corporations that just push money down. Like half my friends, they went to college and they became software developers. Well, those are the guys who still make a lot of money, and they make like $120,000 a year, at 25 or whatever. And then they come in and they can have a family, but they go an hour into the city. Well, then they come into to small town because they don't want to live in the city, and they hire their plumbers and stuff like that. And also people of my generation. And so people here then make like $180,000 a year off of them. And so there's this flowing of money that comes from the corporations that you can redirect into a small economy. But the problem is that people don't get along with their neighbors, and they believe like not forgiving student loan debt. There's this Protestant work ethic of just surviving on your own and independence and whatnot. And I guess that's kind of what I wanted to get your thoughts on is that like the ethical reality of America and conservatism and how people actually act, because the Jews are a very small group of people, you know what I mean? And ultimately, does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. Because that's, as I said, Huntington said, Americans are Anglo-Protestants. That was the main source of American identity was Protestantism, and it's disappearing now. It's disappearing now. So now we've got an identity crisis. So what do we do now? Because we don't have a common. The first thing to go after World War II was the shared consensus on sexual morality. because the Jews deliberately undermined it, and they knew what they were doing, because this was the way to gain control over people by manipulating their passions. So
Right.
now we have a rabbi owning a porn site, and nobody can seem to understand what's going on. That we got to go back to that moral consensus. And if the Protestants can't do it, the Protestants couldn't do it. At the time of the Legion of Decency, they tried to reign in Hollywood, and they couldn't do it. The Catholics had to do it. And so it's another point where the Catholics are going to have to understand who they are and then take charge of this return to moral consensus. And the first obstacle is going to be the Jews and the Israeli genocide in Gaza, because this is a group of people now who feels they can do anything they want with no regard whatsoever to the moral law. That's the fundamental conflict at the beginning of the Fourth Republic, which is right now. It's going to be a conflict between Catholics and Jews over the moral law. Is there a moral law, or is there an ethnic group that gets a pass on all moral laws and is above the moral law and is a kind of master race? And our job is to simply do whatever they want.
Since you talked about sexual immorality, can I ask you about, because Catholics held the line on birth control and everything like that, but we have 3 children, and we obviously are struggling to pay for it and that kind of thing. And what I've heard from Catholics is that we should stop having children by practicing NFP, which I know that's a controversial subject, but I figured you don't care much, you're not afraid of controversy. Do you have any thoughts on that mentality? Do you know what I'm talking about with NFP?
No one has the right to tell you to stop having children. No one. That's your decision. That's no one else's decision but yours. And if they're saying, my experience, I was subjected to the same type of pressure when I was first married. And when we had a first child, we were really poor, but God provided for us. And that's what you have to say. It's you're not here to limit your children to stretch your paycheck. That's the completely wrong idea. And if a Catholic is telling you that, they're wrong. That is not the Catholic way. The Catholic way is to welcome children and rely on God to provide for you, because God knows what's in your bank account. He knows what you need, and he will take care of you. And that's been my experience. I've been taken care of at moments when I thought I was, didn't have anything, when I was facing financial ruin, and God intervened at every instance in my life. And we took care of us. We raised 5 children on a very precarious basis, like a magazine. And that's all I can say. You're supposed to be open to children because you're married, and you're supposed to leave the providing to God's providence. And that's it.
No, I appreciate that. Well, and going into a switch in republics and having new children is kind of a scary thing. You know what I mean?
Nothing's scary. Fear is useless. What is needed is love. And so if you're fearful, there's not enough love in your life. So concentrate on bringing love into your life, and perfect love will drive away fear. It's that simple. Face it.
Okay.
Face up to it. Deal with it. Face it. Look it right in the face and face up to it. And say, I am not going to succumb to my fears. And get out of bed and do what you got to do. And God will take care of you. I got to get off.
Yeah, that's fair.
Our conversation.
Is there anything else that you want to say before we go?
There's plenty we could talk about. Maybe another time.
Well, God bless you. Thank you very much.
Read Barren Metal, and maybe we can talk about that. Okay.
I will read it.
Thank you.
God bless you. Bye.
Peace.
Clicking the buttons that ended.